I don't even realize it because I'm just like focused. What I do realize is like the people that were like this big in the targeting pod are getting very, very big. I'm like, man, like I don't remember any practice attacks. These people looking this big. I'm like, what is going on? So I go to change the zoom on the targeting pod. At the same time, I feel the G's on the jet, and I just look up and I just see like the wings and like the top of the two compounds, because we're right down the alley, or like right below the wings. And I was running this like high G pull.
Welcome to Combat Story. I'm Ryan Fugit, and I served Warzone tours as an Army attack helicopter pilot and CIA officer over a 15-year career. I'm fascinated by the experiences of the elite in combat. On this show, I interview some of the best to understand what combat felt like on their front lines. This is Combat Story. Today we have a combat story where we bring two F-15E Strike Eagle Aviators, a front-seater and a backseater, together to talk about what it was like flying at the same time and some of the adventures that came with that life. Both Tom Gunny Moser and Mike Pako Benitez are decorated aviators, both fighter weapons school qualified, and both former Marines. Tom, an 0311, and Mike, a helicopter aircrew member and door gunner. We interviewed both Gunny and Pako individually if you're curious about their own other near misses and danger close shots, or just the origins of their call signs. Pako, in fact, shared his call sign origin story with us on the air for the first time, and it is a good one. Pako now distributes the Merge newsletter that provides an inside, more fun look at the defense industry with over 20,000 subscribers, and hosts the Merge podcast. Gunny's now a commercial airline pilot since retiring from the Air Force, flying domestic routes across the U.S. Special thanks to Ryan Stinger Fishel for connecting us with these two vets, and with that, please enjoy this rare opportunity to hear from two seasoned combat aviators together. All right, Pako and Gunny, we got you both here for the joint interview. Thanks again for making it out here. Obviously, for those who have heard the original solo interviews, both have this similar path where you start out as Marines, then you find your way to the Air Force. So my first question is, do you think you both would have been such good friends if you didn't have the common Marine Corps background?
Yeah, that actually came out like secondary. That wasn't like, oh, you're a Marine, I'm a Marine. Did we just become best friends? Like that didn't happen at all. I think you iron sharpens iron, and you gravitate towards the people that try to push you to be better. And that's kind of how it started. And then just by happenstance, it's like, oh, Gunny, hey, why is that? Like, oh, you're a Marine, that's cool, huh? But that wasn't the thing that was like, we must automatically like join forces.
And maybe subconsciously, you might recognize similar characteristics in somebody. I remember I was in a room one day and it was a dining out. So we're all in our mess dress, and one of the ladies just talking to my husband, and she's like, oh, where's your husband? She's like, oh, I don't know, look around, look for the guy that looks like a Marine. And she goes, oh, is that him? So, just kind of again, recognizing similar traits. And it was also the connection with the families, because when you go to First Fridays, which are more of a family building event in the squadron where the spouses and the kids come in and they'll have activities, our kids were the same age, at least his son and my son. Our wives hit it off really well initially. So it just kind of was a natural evolution, not just at work, but in our personal lives as well.
And we were lucky. We were talking about this before. Our kids went to like kindergarten together, and they ended up at the same high school together. We've done 4 flying assignments, somehow magically, mostly aligned. So yeah, a lot of.
Yeah. And similar, because they've been children of the military, they have that similar attribute where, we cannot see somebody for years, and you see somebody and you pick right back up where you left off. They're similar. And my son had remarked to me that he had been gone a year, and we were going back down to the area where he went to high school. And he's like, yeah, I'm going to go see Tyler and spend time with him. And afterwards, like, hey, how'd it go? He's like, oh, it was awesome. It was like we were never apart. And they have that type of relationship as well.
Mm-hmm.
It's a kid's resiliency thing.
Yeah. How much, you had mentioned this when we were doing our interview, Tom, where you said you only did 3 years as a Marine, a lot longer in the Air Force, obviously, and a stint as a police officer, but you really still think back more as a Marine, kind of looking back on things. Do you have that feeling? Like, and you went to war with the Marines also. Like, if people ask you, are you an Air Force guy first, Marine second? Do you ever have to answer this?
I identify as myself, honestly. The last interview you heard my stories. I had a interesting 8 years in the Marine Corps. I was, grateful for those experiences, thankful that I made it through it all, and it's a big part of me. But I don't identify as one or the other. I'm just me, and I'm a collection of my experiences.
What could one of you walk us through how you first met? Where were you at in your careers? What year is it at the time?
It's the beginning of 2008.
Yeah.
So I think that you got to the squadron while we were deployed, finished the B course. And so we get back from deployment. I'd been in the squadron probably a year and a half by then. And Mike and a couple other people that went through training with him were in the squadron when we got back. So as soon as we got back, they were right there ready to go. And again, after deployment, you lose people, and they were there ready to fill in that gap. And so that's when we met, right after that.
I think you were probably starting your flugs, right?
I went to 2 flug right after we got back from the deployment.
Flug?
Flight lead upgrade. So he was deployed as a wingman, starts as 2-ship, 4-ship. So I'm a nobody, basically qualified Wizzo. I was probably at a bunch of your upgrade rides, either blue air or red air at some point. So luckily I can't remember ever being like the DFP.
Is that like an FNG?
The reason something fails,
like the debrief focus
point. Like
if you're the DFP, like that means like you are the wedge. Like everyone's like, you're the reason this failed.
So you're the junior guy, obviously, as you meet, because you've come back from a deployment already. Do you remember, like, what are people saying about Pako coming into the unit at the time?
He was strong. I mean, and the further you get throughout your career, especially as a weapons officer, you learn to identify people early. When we were weapons officers together, we would have conversations about just the guys going through their initial mission qual. Now, that doesn't mean if someone doesn't do as well or struggles, you write them off, but you can identify some of the people that have the characteristics, the aptitude, and the attitude that you're looking for, even that early on in training. And then you can start to groom them and build them through their career. And Pako was one of those guys.
So let's let the record reflect. I don't think he directly groomed me in my
career.
No,
I wasn't groomed.
I'm just kidding.
I wasn't that far in front of him. I mean, a year and a half isn't really that long in the squadron to where, I was still a wingman really when he showed up. So I hadn't even started the flight lead up.
Yeah, we were talking a little bit in our one-on-one. Like that time, it was just an incredible time. That 2008 time period, the talent, just natural talent, capability, leadership aptitude, just all coming together at once. That was an amazing year and a half of just people, and the output of that overlap. I think we're like 15 or 20 weapons officers came out of that time frame.
And I totally agree. And I think sometimes your first squadron is always the one you remember most fondly. But we've had individually and combined, and multiple members of the squadron at that time have all had those same thoughts and conversations of, why was it so great? Was it just because it was our first squadron, or was it because there were so many great aviators, tacticians, and people that just came together? And like he highlighted, I talked a little bit about Simon because he was my first combat Wizzo, my first combat mission. Simon, and then he was the top 3 when the jet went down. And, he was in that squadron, and he was a weapons officer, weapons school squadron commander. And there was 15 to 20 people just out of that 60-person squadron over a year and a half time frame that ended up going to weapons school, becoming squadron commanders. Some went to the Thunderbirds, some went to test pilot school. I mean, it was an incredible group of people and talent.
Yeah, the story I was telling you about the Helvin province with the Widow JTACs. Yeah. That 2-ship, my front seater ended up going to test pilot school, and then our flight lead, pilot, and Wizzo ended up both going to weapons school. So out of the 4 people in the formation, all went to tier 1, like PhD level class.
What would you attribute it to?
I've never been able to figure out, nor I've really spent too much time thinking about it. But I just, without going into what is it, the why, it's like the what is just incredible. Like I remember just the morale and just the energy being around like a team like that where everyone is trying to make everyone better. Like there's no negativity. It's not like, hey, this was wrong. It's like, hey, you could do better like this. Here is how I do it. It's like everyone is trying to make everyone else better, which is you'd think that that's common sense,
Right.
but sometimes
It's not.
it's not common. Sometimes it's like, well, I need to be better than you because of my, I need to get in this upgrade on this time, or maybe it's a little bit of tit for tat. But, one of the things that I clearly remember was that we would just the culture of the squadron, you'd fly like Monday through Friday, Saturday, everyone would be just gone, just disappeared. And then Sunday afternoon, like 1:00, if you went into the squadron, half of the squadron would be at work, like in regular clothes in the vault, studying, like talking tactics. And like, that was like a thing. It was a known thing in the squadron. Like if you wanted to go to work Sunday afternoon, you'll be better at your job.
Did that come from the top?
No,
Like,
nope. No guidance.
No, that wasn't a direction. That was just, it was the environment. And when I listen to him talk about it, and I try to think, maybe when you talk about culture and morale and that it was a cooperative versus a competitive environment, I think a lot of that does stem from leadership, from the squadron commander to the DO and the weapons officer. We had just phenomenal weapons officers who encouraged you to want to be better. It wasn't forced you had to come in on a Sunday, but if you were in an upgrade and you wanted to be successful, and really it goes back to that. We talked yesterday about you doing this normally for the man or woman next to you. And when you're surrounded by all this talent, you're like, I don't want to let them down. I want to be as good as I can so I can help them be as good as them or not let them down.
Yeah, I think some of that is not just wanting to fail, but also not trying to be like the DFP.
yeah.
Like if you are clearly the wedge in your high performing team, like one of two things is going to happen. You got to fix yourself or someone's going to fix you, right?
And even the wedge, I don't know these terms. Like, what's the wedge?
It's like the wedge, you're the bottom of the stack.
The simplest human tool.
Yeah, the simplest human tool, the wedge.
Oh, I love it. So you both end up going, and we're jumping around chronologically, and that's fine here. You both go to fighter weapons school, but you go as backseater, front seater. What are the different things you're learning coming out of that school for those different roles?
Well,
if at all?
We were staggered. We were supposed to go together, and then Mike got delayed a little bit, and so just a class, and so which I was really looking forward to going together.
Yeah.
It was just it's always better. Not that the guys I was with were fantastic, but most of them were from other squadrons, and I knew them just not as well. Mm-hmm. And to have a friend in an environment like that is extremely valuable. So I went in the beginning of 2012, and then you went in the last half of 2012.
Half, yeah.
But it's the roles you're still learning. I mean, the beginning of it is the blocking and tackling, like we talked about yesterday, the fundamental mission sets and how to become an expert on that. But both of you need to know how to do that. And that's one thing that the F-15E community does really well is pilots will get up and brief 1v1 dogfighting. Whizzles will get up and brief 1v1 dogfighting. And it's funny when you have a really strong Wizzo and a pilot that may not be as familiar with dogfighting. I've listened to tapes and been there when Mike's pretty much controlling the plane from the back seat verbally, telling the pilot what to do
in a dogfight
because he knows what they need to do to maneuver the airplane.
I've had some fun stories where I take a brand new lieutenant in the front seat and me in the back seat, and I just kind of do this, do that, and then start crushing the flight leads that they're fighting against. What's going on? Like, well, I'm just trying to help.
And when you have, and the reason that's critical is because you both need to understand what each other's job is and how to do it. But because different experience levels may be in the airplane, you've got to back each other up and help each other. But also, I've seen it where when you have a strong pilot and then you have a strong Wizzo who can quarterback a fight from the back seat, it's amazing when it comes together and the capability that you can bring to bear. We've done it together, and I've seen it with other Wizzos as well.
You ever hear like not really a story, but the analogy about like 6 feet behind the foxhole? Like there's the guy in the foxhole, and then there's a guy like 6 feet behind us. So when you're in the foxhole, you have a little bit different perspective of what's going on. Like I got my fields of fire, I got this much rounds, this and that. And you have the guy that's 6 foot behind him that although he's right there, he brings a different lens to the situation and and sometimes can help see like, hey, I can see the next move ahead, or hey, this thing is going to be a problem in 30 seconds, or hey, I can think 5 minutes ahead, because you have that different temporal distortion, the ability to do it. Where like one person trying to do that, they like great humans can do that, and we've seen it, but that's really where it comes down to. But back to your original question about like weapon school, there's like hundreds of little things that all kind of get built, and then they're like Legos, they come together at the end. Besides just flying, like, here's the secret of weapon school. It's probably Top Gun's the same way. It's a leadership course disguised as a flying course, right? As flying is important. That's not what matters most. It's the leadership and the skills, not just to lead, but to manage. And so like things that you don't think of, but just like you can't, that are just in your DNA now. So like time, like sense of time. Like that is something like you've probably been through courses that you understand, like the PhD level sense of time. Like I know what 90 seconds feels like. I know what 30 seconds feels like. I know what 15 minutes feels like. And you don't have to plan things to time box. Like hey, go give me a brief in 3.5 minutes on this topic. You stand up and you're like, oh, it has to be plus or minus 5 seconds. Like, okay. Like our briefs at weapons school are like 65 minutes, like plus or minus a minute. And so you have
65 minutes.
Yeah. Yeah. And you're standing up there and you have
that's not the hard part. It's the plus or minus a minute.
It's plus or minus.
Because if you go under or over, it's an auto fail.
Yeah. So those types of things, what it allows you to do is you go, well, how do I solve this problem? Right. And there's different ways. The people, I used to do that a lot in my upgrades when I have upgradees that were doing really good because they practiced a lot. And they're like, hey, I got my brief. And they practice a lot about the brief. Like the brief's the brief, doesn't matter. Like execution and debrief is where the real stuff is. So what I used to do, like the upgradees that were doing real well, and I was the instructor of record, and they're like, they're going to crush this ride. So I'd go in like 10 minutes before the brief. I'm like, hey, how long is your brief supposed to be today? He's like, oh, it's going to be 65 minutes. All right, you have 45 minutes. You're 45 minutes. And so I'm like, all right, and we're going to start in 10 minutes. You got to cut 20 minutes out of your brief. And that was like purposeful. Like, okay, you solve for one problem, but do you actually understand time management? Can you, from a leadership perspective, like, can you focus on what matters most, or are you just going to try to talk faster? And it's really interesting to see the people who instantly start with the wrong solution. Because within 2 minutes, you're like, all right, stop. Like, this is wrong. Like, that's you.
You're just on fast forward.
Yeah, like that's not going to help, right? And so if you as you set the cadence of the leadership and the success of your mission in the first, like at the time hack, like everyone's watches are down or queued to the second. Like everything is about precision. And when I inject this, it changes the scenario, change the conditions. Like your ability to adapt and lead us through it is very, very important. Mm-hmm. So being able to speak faster doesn't actually help anyone else in this room. In fact, it actually is like transferring angst, which is the one thing as the leader you don't want to do. And so how are you going to solve this problem? Not transfer angst, reassure us that you have the confidence to lead us. So like just little things like that. And there's hundreds of them, but that's just one example.
Yeah, I'll give you a couple other examples. And like Mike said, it's a leadership course. It's a critical thinking course. And that's what he's alluding to, right? Like you can have your planned script, but enemy gets a vote. Things change. It's dynamic. And so they would give you this tactical scenario. They'd be like, hey, here's the scenario for next week. You guys go figure it out. Come up with a tactical solution. So we all collaborate. We come up with a solution. And we used to call the Monday morning flight that went out, whichever student was going out was the sacrificial lamb, right? Because they go out and it ends very poorly, right? And they come back and they're like, oh, that was a disaster. And so then the instructors go, oh yeah, we've tried that before. We knew that wasn't going to work. Like, well, great, right? Like they could information I could have used Friday. But
it's part of the process of learning, right?
It's that's how you learn. You don't learn by somebody telling, you learn by doing. And so and other things.
There's also, and you'd appreciate this, and I think a lot of your listeners would, trauma bonding, right? It's a thing, right? We have shared hardship. We have to overcome this adversity together. Like trauma bonding, it's a thing.
And why is the trauma? And so, for example, we were halfway through the program, and I went out on a basic surface attack ride. We were doing basic kinds of attacks that I had done since the middle of the initial training course, right? And I was making mistakes that I've never made, even as a brand new wingman. And I came back and I was kind of dejected, and I'm sitting at the bar, right? We talked about learning happens at the bar. And I'm like, I don't know what's going on. I don't know what happened. Like, I suck. I've never made these mistakes before. And the instructor starts laughing. I'm like, really? And he goes, dude, you think you're unique? You think this isn't uncommon? He's like, why do you think that is? Like, I don't know, man. It is a very deliberate program. And you don't realize that in the beginning. It's very deliberate. He said, we try to time deprive you, sleep deprive you to a point. I mean, obviously you got to get rest. You're still flying jets. Safe. But time deprive you. You know, we throw you curveballs. We put you in situations you've never been before. He go, we try to stress you as much as we can. He said, we can never replicate the stress of combat, but we're going to try to stress you as much as we can so that when you're in that combat situation, it's not as bad, right? And he said, now, with all this stress and everything, when do you think your mind has opportunity to dial back? Sadly, it's when you get in the airplane, because muscle memory takes over and your hands and your mind start doing things. And he's like, that's why your mind is dialing back, and that's why you're making these mistakes. And I'm like, wow. But just to hear that, you know, you're not unique, and that shared trauma. Every weekend we had a cadence, right? Every weekend on Saturday, our whole group got together. There was only 6 of us, and we'd go out to lunch or dinner, and we'd kind of talk about the week. And you start to realize how they're getting the same kick in the junk debriefs that you are. And, you know, they're hearing the same things, and we're all making the same mistakes. And so you realize that some of the course is very specific to the individual, but a lot of it is design. It's by design.
Yeah. Like every Friday we'd celebrate graduation. Like, we graduated another week.
Made it.
Yeah. Cause it's what the course is like 7 months long, or what, 6 months long, something like that.
Why are there only 6 of you?
Well, it's a 3 crew class. There's a pilot and a Wizzo each. So in the class, but there's the whole school is probably 200 people a class.
But you're kind of paired with 6 for the duration.
It's the F-15
for the
squadron,
F-15.
Yeah.
So the way it starts, so the first half, well, it's kind of in thirds now, I guess, but the first part of weapons school is platform expert. So the squadrons, although there's like almost every platform in the Air Force is represented, there's intel and other things. Each division at the weapons school is a different platform. So like the Strike Eagle division is the 17th weapons squadron. So the first part, it's focused on down and in, like master your platform. And so there's a lot of wire brushing internally. So this is like care and feeding the community. Like, we're like, no one can beat our children but us. Right.
Yeah.
So there's a little bit of that. Yeah. So there's a little bit of that, but then you do that to make sure like, okay, we're going to let the kids come out and play. And so like, then the next phase is like, let's put the squadrons together. And so let's do like small package integration. So, hey, how can a F-15E and an F-22 integrate together? And we start building those up. And so like there's some interesting missions with that, you know, back in the day. And then it builds and builds. And then at the end, it's like, okay, now we know how to put things together and do package integration. And then the final phase of the program is like, how do we win wars? And so it's bringing all of the capabilities together. So it's space, intel, all the air domain, and you get a whole bunch of other things. You get bringing the Navy TAC air in. It's command and control. It's everything all together in, you know, massive packages with wicked hard problems, to see how all of these pieces come together, and really like the culmination of like, what did you actually learn in this course? Because there's a lot of personalities and something like that.
Oh, I bet.
And everyone is trying to like do their best, and someone has got to lead that. Right. So there's designated leaders for package leads, mission commanders, things like that.
Well, yeah. And you asked like, why only 6? In the Strike Eagle squadron there, it's really a resource issue: jets, maintenance, and instructors. And they've gone down to 4 guys before, only 2 crews. It depends on the resources and how they're doing.
Just a quick word from our sponsor, Bolotor, and we'll get right back to this combat story. I got to tell you guys about the Bolotor podcast. They interview the top people in the outdoors. Listen to the guests they've had on their show. Includes EJ Schneider from Naked and Afraid. They've actually had 5 people from Naked and Afraid on their show. Jordan Jonas from the show Alone. Forrest Gallant. That guy was on Joe Rogan's show. He knows everything about the outdoors, animals, wildlife, you name it. tons of other people from the Discovery Channel, National Geographic, the Red Bull team, and much more. The host is Michael Stein, who's the founder and CEO of Bolotor, an outdoor products company. He's also an actor, filmmaker, stand-up comedian that's worked with Academy Award winners. Guy gets around. Go to their website at bolotor.com. That's BOLOTOR.com. Or just look it up on all the podcast platforms for the Bolotor Podcast. That's the Bolotor Podcast, anywhere podcasts can be found. If you want outdoor adventure stories, tips, and tricks about the outdoors, or discover things you never knew about the outdoors, and hear from the most influential people in the outdoor industry, check it out, the Bolotor Podcast. And now, back to this combat story.
Taking a hard pivot here.
Yeah.
Because we didn't talk about this on the one-on-ones. I'd like to hear maybe one or two stories from each of you on closest you came to dying. In aviation, there are a lot of these.
Okay.
What are some that come to mind?
I'll go first. I'll give you a chance. I know one or two of yours. We'll see if you actually tell us that one. The one of them I remember is one of my I think it was my first combat strafe pass, first deployment. Might have been like my fourth sortie, something like that. Pretty young, lieutenant flying with a pretty new flight lead. Actually, we were number 2, but he was a flight lead qual, but flying as number 2. The other jet, experienced Wizzo and another flight lead who was leading it, obviously. And we got called to a tick up in northwest Afghanistan, like way northwest. And there's a name escapes me. There's a city way in the northwest. It's like 300 miles west of Bagram. It's way out there. Anyway, so we get called to a tick way out there. It's like nothing ever happens up there. Except this day. So we get called on station, and it's like something you see out of a movie. It's a terrorist training compound, and there's like 100 people with like robes, like running around shooting AK-47s out of this compound. It's like something like oh my god, this is real. You can't make this up. And early on, I'm like, oh, this is what every sortie is supposed to be like, right? Like, no, there's a comic. It's like comical that like I'm getting to see this on like my first couple of sorties, and so. We couldn't drop any weapons because the compound, we couldn't drop any bombs because the compound could or could not have women and children. We were talking to Stuart about that earlier. So we're like, okay, like we do a show of force. So a flight lead does a show of force. Well, then you can see it. Everyone is kind of gathering up to like leave, and they're like, this is great. We're just but because they're in this alleyway, like leaving this, it's like an open air compound. We're just giving you 9 lines to just strafe up and down the road as this like mob of people. I'm like just like 100 people are like trying to flee and try to break contact from the U.S. forces that are in the region. I'm like, okay, again, because there's a firefight going on. So you get a 9 line. It's a shooter. So that means that the first jet is going to strafe, and then the second one's going to strafe kind of right behind them. With under 1 clearance, you just call in 2 in directions, and so we set it up, and we end up going in first. Just the nature of 2 end up being in front of 1. Get the 9 line, read it back, and I'm like, oh, like this is gonna happen. Like get everything ready. It's like here's our strafe stuff, and we roll in, and the group of people are running away down the alley. They're starting to get a little strung out, but they're running down the alley away from our roll-in direction. So they're going away from us. And I'm trying to move the targeting pod because this is like a couple miles away. So the pilot can't see the people. I can see them because I'm looking at the targeting pod. Like I can see like, oh yeah, they're definitely like middle-aged men, right? Like you can definitely tell. And they're all running with their robes on. And so I have the targeting pod, and where I move the targeting pod, because I can see him, the pilot can look in his heads-up display and see where the dot is that he has to like move to align the symbology and just pull the trigger. So I'm moving the thing down the road to like keep it on the blob of people as we're calling in for clearance. And I call in, we get the clearance. Well, the front seater is like focused on moving the symbology to keep like, no. And he misses the radio call. So a second or 2 go by, and we're at the open fire range, and he says, confirm clearance. The right thing to do would have been abort.
Because you're behind now.
Yeah,
it's a little too late.
So he doesn't ask me. He keys the mic and says confirm clearance, which is like another second delay because it's like it's a encrypted radio, so it beeps, it does the whole thing, and it's like cleared hot. So we end up so the pilot ends up, and I'm not looking at the HUD symbology. I'm focused on moving the thing to keep the cursor on the moving target of people. And the pilot opens fire. He squeezes the trigger inside of our ceasefire, which is like our safety stop. So he starts the engagement inside of the safety stop. I don't even realize it because I'm just like focused. What I do realize is like the people that were like this big in the targeting pod are getting very, very big. I'm like, man, like I don't remember any practice attacks, these people looking this big, right? Like when we were in training. And I'm like, what is going on? So I go to change the zoom on the targeting pod. At the same time, I feel the G's on the jet, and I just look up because I've been looking at the screen, and I look up and I just see like the wings and like the top of the two compounds, because we're right down the alley, or like right below the wings. And I was running this like high G pull, and the pilot said something I can't remember, and it was like, oh,
Whoops.
like whoops, and. We have a shot thing on our data page. You can actually look at your parameters, right? Well, it showed some parameters, but not like the ones that we needed to try to figure out. We're like, how close did we get to like hitting the ground? Well, it turns out the other jet did the same thing. So both of us messed that up kind of one after another, for almost the same reasons. So so the engagement happens, like that's all done, like mission complete. Right. So we're flying home. So we have like 300 miles to go fly. And we're like, how are we going to explain this? Like, oh, well, so we're starting to think about like, what's the data page? We're trying to pull up the weapons delivery information. It's like, how bad is it when we get back? And so you get back, we look at the tapes, and I'm like, yeah, we were probably like under 100 feet in the bottom of the recovery, which is like a split second from crashing. And the only reason, so we're like, hey guys, like this is what happened. Here's why it happened. We went directly to the DO, the commander, like this is what happened. And it was like, I think the commander was in crew rest. So the next day they come back and like, hey, we got our weapons officer at the time gets a report. He's like, who was this flight? And I was like, it was us. It's like, hey, that was like the most amazing strafe pass that JTAC had ever seen. It was in their after action report. They called you guys out by name. It was like the most amazing strafe pass I'd ever seen. Oh, and by the way, like you didn't know this, but they actually had like a quadcopter drone that was doing like surveillance. And you, for whatever reason, I'm not sure how, but you actually flew under the quadcopter that was like videoing the compound. And so here's a picture. They have a snapshot they sent. It's a picture of like our jet like pulling up to not hit the ground. And you can see in the picture, you can see the bullet impacts, like the explosions in the alley of like between the two compounds of how close we were. I was like, oh, that's let's not do that again.
And you gave us the picture.
Yes,
right?
I have the picture.
We're okay to show it.
Yeah,
Right?
yeah.
So for those who are listening, if you want to see it, like we'll have it on the video. It is, I mean, it takes a minute because it's all FLIR to kind of break it out, but you clearly see a jet just above the buildings.
Yeah.
And sorry, so when you're pulling up out of that, is there any discussion like throughout the rest of the engagement of like with the front seater? Hey, what just happened?
Yeah.
Or is it, let's wait until this is done?
It was like, we had clearance. Like, there's a crew coordination where it's like cleared hot, like cleared to fire, confirmed clearance. Like, no, I already told you it was good. So it was, we're still working out some crew coordination stuff. And it was early in the deployment. So it was first time I ever flown with them. And yeah.
Oh, and over time, a lot of Wizzos, for that exact reason, they'll have us like a pacing in the back of their mind on a strafe pass, to where we've seen it. If you roll in higher than the minimum, the pass takes longer, and they'll start getting uncomfortable because it's their mental pacing. They'll be like, abort. And I've had them abort. I'm like, what happened? It just felt like so long. It was too long. Right. And so specifically for that reason.
They've seen it. Yeah.
I talked a little bit about that with the mishap, with like you're expecting it to take this long down the chute. And then if it takes a lot less than that, you're not expecting it.
You won't know.
So you won't know. So controlled the flight into terrain.
All right. So there's knowns and unknowns, right? So the unknowns, like you were talking about it going on a strafe pass, you're going down to 300 to 500 feet above the ground, which the enemy can see you. They can shoot you, especially when you're coming in as the second jet on the same axis.
They know the route.
Yeah,
They've seen this once and they know what's coming. So I've seen RPGs being shot, the smoke trails in the targeting pod, and they're shooting at you. Now, obviously, they never hit us, or I might not be here to talk about it. But the one I know probably the closest that I came it was actually a training mission. I was in the ops squadron, so I was still a wingman, but I was in the ops squadron. But the training squadron needed some support, so they asked us to send over a pilot and a Wizzo to fly to be the red air, the bad guy, in a 2v1. So it was going to be an instructor pilot and a student Wizzo, a student pilot, and an instructor Wizzo in the training jets, and then we were going to be the bad guy for them to fight 2v1.
Air to air.
Air to air.
All air to air. Okay.
And like we mentioned yesterday, the wingman's number one job is don't hit the flight lead, right? And then don't hit anybody else. So in a 2v1 engagement, we end up coming in and we start dogfighting 1v1 with the flight lead. Well, now the number one goal for the wingman is don't hit either of those jets, right? Because we're so focused on each other, I don't have time to monitor another airplane, right? You're in a dogfight, 1v1. And so his job is to come in and kill me. And as we're fighting, I just happen to glance over to my left because the guy I'm fighting is off to my right. So I'm looking over there and I happen to glance up, and I can only imagine what my face looked like at the time, because if you've ever spent any time watching fighter mishap videos from air-to-air engagements, you'll see the jet coming and all of a sudden it gets really big. And normally you'll start to see the bottom of the airplane because they're trying to get away and pull out, and you'll see, and then the tape goes black, normally because they've just run into each other in midair. And that's the picture I saw in the HUD as I looked up and up to my left. I just saw the planform of an airplane coming at us. I thought we were going to hit. When they went by, I couldn't believe we didn't. And so we called a knock it off. I was like, whoa, what's going on here? And we called a knock it off, got back together. We ended up continuing the mission. Everybody talked about it. We were comfortable doing that, but I'm sure there was some discussion between the instructors and the students and on their side. So the ironic thing was we came back and we landed. I'm pissed. Yeah. I'm hot, right? I'm like, come on, man. Like,
I mean, there's an instructor in the other aircraft, right?
Most likely. I can't remember if they do ACM. They might do ACM crew solo, meaning it's two students, but I'm like, dude, like, number one, don't hit anybody, right? I mean, you've got as much of a vested interest in that as everybody else, but I'm pissed. And I talked to the instructors later. I'm like, so did they fail the ride? And they go, no. I'm like, what?
Yes, they did.
They go, well,
I need you to go fail.
That was a learning ride. There was no requirement to demonstrate proficiency. I'm like, what about being dangerous and almost hitting another airplane? But yeah, I didn't go support the training squadron for a little while after that.
They knew not to call
I was a little
Gunny.
Burned, but
don't ask Gunny to go.
I'm surprised. Like, speaking of mid-airs, I was just thinking about this when you were saying that. Like, during like the surge in Afghanistan, so like your 2008 2010, where we were talking about, like, there's like 400 FOBs, 130,000 troops on the ground. I've lost track of how many different allied nations were flying. None of that airspace, fun fact, is like, it's not like FAA deconflicted. It's due regard. It's like, don't hit each other. We'll give you some altitudes and, like, keep your head on a swivel. Yeah, I probably, 2 or 3 near mid-airs with like MQ-9s just like flying around.
Yeah.
Like, whoa, like, what was that? Like, oh man. And then you get into like the weather. So like in the winter in Afghanistan, like terrible weather, like none of the control agencies are certified to control an IMC. It's all like due regard. Like, well, I can't deconflict my flight path if I'm in a cloud that's like surface to 30,000 feet.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like icing conditions. It's at night, but we do it because, like, hey, for some reason, there's a guy outside the wire and they need help. And it's a lot of close calls with that, with just, the winter and the winter missions were the worst. And the metrics from the KAOC, and I'm just bouncing around a little bit. I remember the metrics in the KAOC. It's like, well, you guys are flying. It's like, well, are we? Are we going to fly? Like, what are we supporting? Like, are you going to do XCAS, which is like on call? Like, why are we doing XCAS? Is this because there's no missions? Like, well, there's no missions yet. Like,
Mm-hmm.
So we finally got wise to it in our top 3. Like, all right, so the missions don't fly, or the missions don't go outside the wire unless there's a medevac. And so if the medevac weather cancels, the mission's canceled, which means we should cancel. So we used to go find like what region are we going to? Like who covers the medevac? Like call them and like, oh, their weather canceled and the mission canceled. And then it gets, but otherwise they were setting us up for like hours on end doing circles and just at night in the weather for no reason because
that's bad.
Those are the, hundreds of stories of just frustration, but you figure out like what, this does not make sense. Let's figure it out instead of chasing a metrics. Like we're here to do a mission. If the mission's not happening, then like, let's save the resources. Yeah. But yeah, near mid-airs, man. Did you ever have any near mid-airs in Afghanistan?
Not that I know of. Luckily with the radar, if you got enough time and distance, you can see. I remember I didn't realize it that I had awareness of the U-28. They didn't have awareness of us, and we were given clearance to fly through their kill container.
What's the U-28?
It's a Pilatus PC-12.
Draco is the call sensor fluid. It's a AFSOC.
Draco. Okay.
It's a prop ISO aircraft.
And so they were in this kill box. I was given clearance to go through the kill box. And as I purposely waited to get behind them and then kind of made my turn and started climbing. Well, inadvertently, I didn't realize that it set off a resolution advisory on their TCAS, which means that they have to honor that. It's essentially the transponder airplane sees another airplane coming, and if it's climbing or if it senses or detects that it could be a conflict, it's got certain criteria of like within a certain altitude, within a certain time frame. Initially, it'll turn it amber, kind of like a hey, and the airliners have this as well, and it'll say traffic, and you're like, oh, okay, there's a potential conflict. And if it turns red, it'll then actually give the airplanes different instructions to either climb or descend to deconflict them. We didn't have that in the Strike Eagle. So he got a resolution advisory, and he's in either the upper teens or the low 20s, which they don't have a lot of excess energy at that point. So they didn't know we were there, which was a bad assumption on my part that command and control had told them we were going to be transiting. But so, yeah, they get this resolution advisory, don't know we're there. They freak out. They're low on energy, and to where they called and tried to file like a safety complaint. I can't remember what it was called in the desert.
Oh my God. Bringing back memories.
File a complaint on us. And I was like, I called the guy. And he was a former fighter guy. I'm like, dude, I knew you were there. Like, what? I don't understand. There was no danger. And he says, you don't realize what happened in our airplane and whatnot. And so I was like, I'm sorry. I didn't realize that it was going to cause this issue. I thought you knew we were there and whatnot. But
I think it was that same deployment. There was we started getting a string of these because it's due regard, but they would say, go proceed to this. And you go, okay, I'm proceeding. And then I would put you in, unbeknownst to us, because we don't have these systems, it would trigger other people's resolution advisories. So there was probably a string of like C-130s filing headers against us for like a week or two at a time. We're like, why are we filing safety reports against each other? Like, what's going on here, guys? Like,
but it also happens stateside. For example, the warning areas out over the water where we do a lot of the training in the military, it's just due regard airspace. Now, a lot of times the wings will deconflict it inside of the wing itself to try to make it to where there's nobody else in that airspace. But sometimes the Navy parks a carrier there, and the Air Force and the Navy don't talk to each other. And the next thing you know, you're in the middle of a fight and a section of Hornets goes by, and you're like, whoa, where'd these guys come from? I mean, I've had to stop fights because jets just start flying right near each other and don't even know they're there or talking.
It's not as pristine as you may have been led to believe.
We call it big sky theory.
Big sky theory. Yeah. A lot of big sky theory
big
going
sky.
on.
But amazing. You'd be surprised, even with the vastness of the sky, how close two airplanes can get if they're not aware of each other.
Yeah.
Yeah. I had we were doing a test event, a large force test event in Florida in our last unit. And there was F-35s in front of us, and I forgot what the scenario was, but they were supposed to do something, turn around. And they were at an altitude block that was like slightly off from us, like maybe 1,000-foot clearance. And we were going to be below them. They're going to be above us. And for whatever reason, there's a whole bunch of talk going on. And they were supposed to be laterally offset too. So they weren't laterally offset because we turned the wrong way, they turned the wrong way. So they're directly in front of us. And now they're coming towards us, but we're altitude deconflicted. Well, I think everyone starts talking on the radio, and the F-35 pilot started descending out of his block. And then we were climbing. We had a slight climb out of our block. And we ended up going like, it was close. It was much like one of those things, like it caught my eye I didn't notice it on like using our data link and sensors because you could see it all. It caught my eye when I saw that like a flat, like a dot, and it just went like, oh, what was that?
Literally caught your eye.
It caught my eye. Like it caught my corner of my eye, and I looked up to see this F-35 beam past me. You know, whatever. We're probably going 400 knots. It's probably going 400 knots. So it's like 800 knots of closure just zipping by you. Yeah.
Jeez. How about when you mentioned, I think, Mike, that you two rarely flew in the same aircraft, maybe a handful of times. Did that happen downrange at all? The two of you in the same aircraft?
If it did in Afghanistan, it was maybe once or twice, but nothing that I can remember.
Yeah, if we did, it wasn't significant because I don't remember.
And it wasn't for lack of trying, I don't think. So and the reason I say this is like the running joke, because everyone knew us in the first squadron, is he was a Marine front seater, as a Marine backseater, and with the big turnover we were telling you about, like a lot of when people leave, people come. Well, people leave, like you don't need their names in the jets anymore. So when that influx kind of happens, they redo the names in the jets. And there's a whole like process in the squadron, how we go through it. And so we had managed to put both of our names in the same jet. It was as kind of like a joke. And it was like, I think it was Tail 1673, I believe it was, in the Rockets, their first squadron. And the joke was like, that's Marine 1.
Nice.
And so I think we were trying to put like a Marine Corps emblem under the speed brake or something at one point as a joke, but that became like Marine 1. And then we both ended up going, it was slightly opposite again. We both ended up in the Eagles, a training squadron, 334th Fighter Squadron. Once again, like outflux of people, yada, yada, yada. Marine 1 exists again. We get our names on in the Eagles. And then we did it again in the Bowlers, I believe, right? Yeah. So our last squadron. So we had 3 squadrons with our names in the jet. And the running joke between all these years was like, that's Marine 1. Like, don't mess with Marine 1.
That's great.
It's a good jet.
Well, so in the shop in the squadron that does the coordination for names on the jets was the weapons and tactics shop. So
which you guys were
that's why I went
of,
right out of initial qual training, and then we were in it in the Eagles, and then we were the leads of it in England. So we just happened to be in a position to make that happen.
How about, were you in the air together, lead wingman?
Yeah.
Yes.
That was more common?
We've done that a few times. Yeah. Yeah.
Any experience downrange in those that you might both have been on?
There's one in particular.
You both remember it?
There's one.
Oh, let's do it.
Well,
Tom, do you know where this is going?
I don't.
Yes.
Well, so there is one in particular, but it's an NDA mission. So we
I do.
So it's a fantastic story. Interestingly enough, it's, if you're a tier 1 guy, your NDA restrictions are different than tier 2, tier 3. So if you can Google, you can find some tier 1 information on it, including a guy who got a silver star.
Oh, dang.
So yeah, good times. We've definitely had some shared experiences.
How about other ones that you can talk about that you recall?
In the same, man.
So
even generically?
I'll talk about Israel.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, go for that.
So the squadron gets tasked to do a deployment to Israel, and it's only going to be, I think, 6 jets, a smaller group of people. And so Mike and I are going to go as the weapons officers, and initially the expectation for this deployment was, this is really more about partner building with nations than it was a tactical training exercise. So
the thing was called they called it blue flag. It was like Israel wanted their own red flag, but in the Middle East, and so it was like they're kickstarting this whole initiative. So that's what kind of kicked this whole thing off.
Yeah. So expectations low, but so we go there. I had never been to Israel, and it turned out to be a really cool experience. From a non-flying perspective, they put us up in Eilat on the southern tip of the country, which is like a resort town right on the beach, on the boardwalk. The guys from maintenance, their hotel had a dive shop attached to it. And I think you actually started your open water certification there, right?
Yeah, I went diving. Yeah, I did the Red Sea thing. Yeah.
And so just from a off time perspective, it was fantastic. And because Israel's such a small piece of airspace and country, they fly around at like 400 knots all the time. Like saving gas isn't a thing. So that was pretty awesome. They have real surface air missile threats that we could use to train with. So it was better than we thought it was going to be. And it was the US, the Israelis, the Greeks, and the Italians. which I had never worked with any of those countries. So that was a really cool experience as well. And the way we worked it was we kind of set overall as a group the objectives of what we were trying to accomplish from the mission objectives overall each day. And then each day, a country would be the overall mission commander and the lead. And so for the US day, Mike and I talked, we're like, hey, we're going to fly in the same jet together. Like, we are going to lead this together. And we actually, I mean, everybody's heard of rock, paper, scissors. Have you ever heard of gunman, karate man, gorilla man?
No.
So similar concept. One will beat the other. So we did gunman, karate man, gorilla man to determine who was going to actually be the mouthpiece, right? Because there can only be one leader. Even though we're flying in the same airplane, somebody has to be the guy to stand in front of the group and be the lead and dictate. And so, and it was funny because our squadron, or the rest of our flight mates, Mike won. So he was going to be
or lost, right?
For us, when we were playing, whoever won was going to do it.
Because obviously you want to hey, let's show the kids how it's done, kind of thing.
And so, but the rest of our flight's like, oh, he must have lost. I'm like, no, he won, man. Like, we want to be here, right? And so we go up and it was interesting. He may not remember this, but so we're very disciplined and we're very specific, and details matter, right? And precision. And I remember, I think it was an Italian guy. He's in this one meeting where you come back together and Mike says, hey, I need your route and I need your target points. And when the next meeting, you need to bring them. He says, yes, sir. So the next meeting we reconvene and Mike's like, okay, where's your route and your points? And he's like, and Mike says, get out. Don't come back until you have them. And he's kind of looking around and smiling like it's a joke. And Mike's like, no, I'm serious. Get out and go get them.
Do you remember this, Mike?
Yeah.
And so he leaves, right? And part of it is setting a tone. It's setting expectations. Like, you will be held accountable. If you were told to bring something, you're expected to bring it, right? Or go get it. And so after that meeting broke, one of the Israeli senior guys comes over to me and he's like, hey, Gunny, that's Pako is very intense, isn't he? I was like, oh, really? He's actually being pretty mellow today with you guys. And so, but it set the tone, right? And through training and experience, we were able to go out and lead that mission. And all the mission objectives at the end of the day were green. We had succeeded.
Mm-hmm. And that was, what year was that?
That had to be 2013.
2013?
Yeah.
So you can't make this up. So if you fast forward like 3 years, I'm in Greece as a white sail planning lead to represent same squadron. We're in Greece for this large force exercise. It has Germans, Israelis, Greeks, us, and I don't know, 2 other countries. So we show up to this planning conference, and the Israeli guys are there, and this guy is like, Pako. I'm like, huh? He's like, I remember you. It was the guy. It was the Israeli from Blue Flag from like 3 years before. He's like, this would be very good. It would be very good.
Well, so we accomplished the mission, which was really great. Well, then the next day, one of the other countries was the mission commander, and it didn't go so well. And at the end of the debrief, he was like, I think these objectives are unachievable. We should lower the objectives. And we're like, dude, come on. The goal is not to green the board. The goal is to get better tactically, integration wise. We don't expect to win every time. Like, this is a learning thing. And I'm like, you don't just lower the bar because you can't reach it. That doesn't help anybody. So.
I do remember our mission, like the execution was pretty awesome. And I remember coming back and like, turns out like a well-laid plan executed like pretty good is awesome. So I remember like the debrief being like morale was pretty high across like the coalition. Like that mission accomplished. Like, we've got good training, morale is high. Like,
and that came from weapons school. Like weapons school was like, you come in with a plan. You don't spend hours building a plan. Like, as the mission commander, you come in with a plan. So we got together that weekend and we had the map, and in I think it was about 30 minutes, we sat down and drew some lines, put some places, and we're like, okay, here's the 80% solution. We'll figure the rest out on Monday.
Just a quick word from our sponsor, Give Legacy, and we'll get right back to this combat story. I was really excited to bring Give Legacy to our listeners. Veterans and members of the armed forces have twice the risk of infertility than the general population. Sperm health can be affected by lifestyle, age, injury, and environment, including exposure to toxic chemicals such as those in burn pits, radiation, and pollutants. Hundreds of men in high-risk occupations like police, firefighters, and members of the military use Legacy to test and freeze their sperm. This will allow them to produce biological children, even if the unthinkable happens. The military's healthcare system offers limited options for couples diagnosed with infertility and no coverage for proactive fertility preservation. Legacy is committed to supporting the military, veterans, and their family members. Legacy's special relationship with the military includes several partnerships, including free access to Legacy's privacy-protected at-home sperm testing with 1 year of complimentary cryopreservation service to all Naval Special Warfare operators and Green Berets, and a partnership with Operation Baby Foundation that provides grants of up to $5,000 to military couples diagnosed with infertility to assist with treatment, surrogacy, and adoption costs. You can find out more by going to www.givelegacy.com. That's givelegacy.com. Listeners can use the code Combat Story to get 10% off everything on the site. And now, back to this combat story.
And then that guy had to follow the next day.
Yeah.
It was a little harder.
I think we were trying to go last for that reason. I'm like, well, whatever.
So speaking of kind of multinational forces, we had talked about it, I think, with the Syria trip. What surprised you most working with other forces, other countries? Like maybe positively surprised you? Is there a particular country that just had some really strong pilots?
Well, I can, so God, I've lost track. There's probably been like 30 different nations that I've integrated with. So I won't remember all of them. They all have like weird, funny stories in my mind. Like I remember the French JTACs, those guys are like, how did you say the bad guys? Like, did we just call them bad guys? Like, yeah, there they are. Like, oh, okay, like give me a 9 line. Yeah. So all great characters. As far as the flying, you definitely have people. I try not to make too many judgments on that because a lot of it is enabled or restricted by just their technological, like what they have, right? So you do what you can with what you have. So, the world's worst pilot flying an F-35 is probably going to still look okay, right? Got it. But the world's best pilot, like flying a Cessna, like there's only so much you can do, right? So I definitely, I hesitate to make any kind of sweeping assumptions, but we work very closely with a lot of different nations. The Emiratis,
the F-16 from the Emiratis.
Those guys
come to my mind.
Those guys were full up. Yeah, the Israelis, like man, those guys were full up. Like impressively full up. Like they're how they think tactically and how they're always like adapting. Like they're up there. Yeah, the Emiratis and Israelis are probably the top 2 that stand out.
Is it mainly you're seeing that in the mission prep phase, or is it also in the air you're noticing it?
I see it in all of it.
It's both. And some of it's also, you can't judge because some of it's cultural restrictions.
How so?
So in different countries, they may not debrief somebody on a mistake because of their status, whether it's related to the royal family, whether it's related to their age and experience, like all these different cultural considerations. And it's a legit thing. We talk about when we get in the debrief, there is no rank in the debrief. I mean, I've been flying I was a lieutenant and I have my Lieutenant Colonel Squadron Commander Wizzo in the back seat. Well, I'm the aircraft commander. But if you don't think I'm going to rely on his experience and he's my boss when we're not in the airplane, right? And so, but when we get in the debrief, the rank, we try to make everybody better and there is no ego. And so not all nations are like that.
Yeah.
And that's why I say it's more of a cultural thing.
I distinctly remember being in this awkward position as a mission commander on an international training event in the UAE, but a completely different time frames. This is like 4 years earlier. Yeah, it was about 4 years earlier. And going out, were you at this? I can't remember if you probably PCS'd already. It was Iron Falcon in like 2011, 2010.
No, I was already in Eagles.
So we're in the Middle East. We have this huge series of large force training events and getting a mission commander upgrade. and it's a combat search and rescue scenario, which is like the worst one you can think of. Like, just, worst case imaginable. All he had to say was that, right? Yeah, it's going to be CSAR. So it's got a little bit of everything. It's got counter air, it's got SEAD, it's got helo escort, close air support, and then you also have rescort, and then you have the PR part of it, and it's all international, and some of the stuff isn't quite translate like what we're used to. So we're trying to play nice to the coalition, and it's my like mission commander upgrade. So the US is going to lead this to show us how it's done. I'm like, oh, thanks guys. So we go out. Execute this thing. It doesn't go well at all. And there's reasons why I won't talk about it here, but it had to do with the rescue vehicle. But basically we set up a ROS, which is a restricted operating zone. And so it's basically a cylinder of air. Like there's the people to recover. Here is the ROS. It was like a 10-mile ROS. And then the helos would then go in there, and that would make sure that all of the aircraft that are flying around do not go in there. Right. So the translation, the rescue helicopters thought that meant they could not go inside 10 miles. So they're in this 10-mile orbit around like for the next like 45 minutes as this huge air-to-air fight's going on. And we're like, status, what's going on? Status update. They're like, man, we're working on it. Realizing like you're just orbiting. Like trying to figure out how do we get to this person if they're 10 miles inside the circle that we can't go into.
This is a puzzle the Americans are throwing at us.
Yeah. So we run out of missiles, run out of gas. We're like, hey, knock it off. Like, mission's over. Let's come back, and we go to debrief. And I'm like, what? And again, I'm trying to track like what happened. Like we had communication with the survivor, with the rescue vehicle. We had the airspace procedure set up. We had the point passed. Everyone's in comms. Like, and we gave you like 45 minutes. Like, I don't understand what happened. And so on the stage in the debrief, in the auditorium on the stage, like going through like the mission, and we have the debrief. We get to the point of like the rescue vehicle, like what is going on? And I won't say what nation it was. And the host nation, like white force lead, that's like the leading everything. It's like, oh, they're not attending the debrief. They have gone home. We're like, and it was a culture thing, right? Because they had screwed up and they don't want to come to the debrief. And it was like, everyone's going to learn a lot by you guys showing up, but that's not culture. Yeah. So that one stood out to me. That was awkward. I'm on the stage. I'm trying to like play nice. And I'm like, I just got put on the spot. My DFP left. Yeah. They didn't want to come to the debrief. And now I'm like, well, I don't know how I'm supposed to pass this ride for my weapons officer who's writing my grade sheet. He's in the front row. Like, well, this is weird. There's probably 250 people in this auditorium that I'm just on this stage now, kind of put on the spot. Like, yeah.
And some of it's internal culture. And I'll give you an example. So that night 2 Syria, right? CENTCOM was very Army centric at the time. The COCOM was an Army commander. And so for a lot of these missions, they wanted an X check. They had all these lines of execution that they would like check. So one of the lines was authority to execute and proceed with the mission into Syria. And so we have a coordination card because communication's everything and expectations. And especially when you're dealing with multiple nations, people are geographically separated. So at the end, we put final on the coordination card and we send it out to everybody. Like, this is the page everybody's operating off of. And because some of these aircraft, they're launching to get airborne, the command and control, before you've even finished. And so we get airborne, and it's like a couple minutes prior to the mission supposed to be executing. And I'm like, hey, status of this line. And they're like, standby, which is like a busy signal, working. You're like, working. Oh God, like, oh no, that could be 5 seconds. That could be 5 minutes. That could be 50 minutes. You're like, I'm like, and
I just remember to respond every time. It's like working. It's like copy, work harder. Like,
well, so and I have to Rolex the vol. So now you've got all these aircraft, multinational, everybody waiting. And I have to tell them, okay, we're going to Rolex 10 minutes, like 10 minutes from now. And anytime you start to Rolex, especially in that kind of environment, you're just asking for things to start falling apart. I'm like, what's the status of this line? They're like, we don't have that line. Like, what do you mean you don't have that line?
I approve myself to execute.
I'm like, what version of the cord card do you have? And they said, well, we have final V2. And I about lost my
You
shit.
can't have final V2.
That's exactly
There's
what
final.
I said on the radio. I'm like, there is no final V2. There's final. That's what we have.
It's in the name.
So apparently, in the interim, they were talking to the CFAC, and they're like, "Hey, sir, like, when are you going to give the authority for this mission to go?" And he's like, "I already have."
That's the 3-star in charge of like the air war.
Yeah, the air component commander.
Yeah.
And so somebody, not the mission commander, because that was me, decided, oh, we just don't need that line. So they took it out and got a version 2 and pushed it out and just assumed everybody got it because they sent it in the ether, right? And so I almost lost my mind. I'm like, there is no final version 2. The final is the final. And so, I mean, they very clearly came back and said, you are approved to conduct the mission. So
Did you tell him the story about you and I think it was Lord with the first strike in Iraq? You tell him that? Was it you lasing in a MQ or Hellfire, right?
Oh, I did not.
Yeah, can you share
it wasn't you? I thought
No,
it was
me.
Okay.
It was me.
Share.
But
You were there. I
Manned
tell
to unmanned.
What's that?
the good or the bad?
Well, I mean,
Come on.
it's got to have both. So I was talking to my interview. I was like, oh yeah, Tom's got a great story about we're talking about the first like 2 months or so or ish of like all of the kinetics in Iraq. Like it was like drones in the Navy. It was like, it's actually this, but you know, we can't say that at the time. And I was like, actually, I think you had the opening kinetic of the entire like.
I think Air Force. I think the Navy, because they could come off the boat. I think they had the first kinetic of the fight.
Really?
Yeah.
Yours is up in Erbil, right?
Yeah, it was.
Oh yeah.
So I talked to part of it. Part of it was when I was talking about how the ISIS was just there displaying their flag, their trucks, and as soon as it happened to be airborne, luck and timing, and it's like, hey, they are now considered hostile. You're cleared to engage, and we're like, oh shit, and we were dropping SDBs on trucks and some other things. Well, so yeah, there was an MQ-9. They're like, hey, we need you to laser our weapon in. Like, okay, so we're in an orbit around the target, and when you're going to laser for somebody else, there are very specific areas you want to be and areas you don't want to be, because what you don't want to have happen is it sees your laser origination and thinks it's the target
and rides the laser into you.
Right. Yeah. And so, and you want to make sure that the weapon can see the laser, because if I'm lasering the backside of a building and it's looking at the front side of a building, then it's probably not going to hit. Right. So, and it's very specific in our tactics. Well, the Wizzo I was flying with was pretty young, and he's pretty amped up and excited, because remember, so far this deployment, there's very little combat ops going to Afghanistan, and the ones that are, it's rarely going kinetic. So this is his first opportunity, and he's excited. And so, and sometimes once you step on the radio and say something, you start a sequence of events that you can't take back. And so we were not in the right position, and I was working to get there, and the MQ-9 says, call strike posture set, meaning we're in position, we're ready to make this happen. And before he and I even have a conversation, the Wizzo steps on the radio and says, strike posture set. And inside the jet, I think I said something like, dude, we're not ready. Before I could even get on the radio, rifle, which means he's launched the Hellfire.
And you got to have the laser on?
Yeah, not only laser on, which I wasn't as worried about the laser being on. I was more worried about it riding the laser up to our jet. Yeah, because we were not in the optimum position for that. So weapons airborne. I mean, we could turn the laser off, but they also need effects, right? So unless the missile's going to hit us, then we're going to keep that on and try to get it on the target. But I distinctly remember looking over my shoulder, looking to see if I could see the Hellfire, and look to see if it made some bid up into the sky toward the airplane. Now, luckily, it hit the target and things worked out. We debriefed it internally, but that's about as far as it went. But yeah, that was a significant event.
Yeah, there was we were talking about, remember how like the first few weeks they would draw like the containers of like this in this container, it's like strikeable. Then we had to work the FMV feeds for like who's the strike approval. Like, man, there were some weird ones that we ran into. There was It wasn't, well, I don't think it wasn't me. I don't know if it was you, but we had one mission where there was they picked the SIGINT hit of like, yeah, there's a mob of like 200 suicide bombers walking. Like, we need you to go take them out. I'm like, what? Those are the radio calls that you're like, these are like the weirdest radio calls I've ever seen in my career. And sure enough, like there's like a path into Iraq from Syria, and there's a string of like a couple hundred people. It's like, yeah, go ahead and just take them all out. They're confirmed, like they are suicide bombers.
No way.
Like, yeah. I'm like, okay, like, well, how do we? And so it's such a long. I remember this, and was that your mission?
It wasn't my mission, no.
But I remember like talking to the guys afterwards, and like, yeah, like, so how did, like, what happened? Like, well, the first thing we thought, as soon as you drop the first bomb, you're gonna have 100 squirters because you're not gonna be able to get them all. So they're trying to time it, and luckily they're in this valley, so they're trying to time it. So they're dropping like strings. I forgot how many they dropped. Maybe it was like 4 or 8. Like SDBs, small diameter bombs with prox fuses. So basically you'd have this line of prox explosions over all the people. Yeah.
Did it work?
Yeah.
Yeah.
We're
Remember
good.
how we were talking about that, right? Like we can drop a lot of weapons in a short period of time in a big area.
Yeah. And then we get into to Syria. We can talk about Syria if you want.
Yeah.
So all that was Iraq. Things are obviously heating up, and like, hey, we're gonna go into Syria. And I remember being in mission planning when we got the call, like, okay, we're going to hear the targets we're going to go after. In the initial strike phase, it was a U.S. led strike. It was a package Alpha, package Bravo. Package Alpha was Air Force, and it was at night. Package Bravo was going to be, I believe, the Navy, and that was at sunrise, and it had some coalition in there. Well, the host nation where we're coordinating everything is the UAE. And they're like, well, here's the deal. We want to be in your package. I'm like, okay.
Like not the Navy package?
Yeah, like we want to go with you guys. Like, because we've been flying with them for a while.
Yeah, they know
guys.
you. Yeah.
And some more than others, right? And so I'm, oh no, by the way, this is the F-22's first combat mission, which is I'm sharing a desk with like the weapons officer. They've been doing training. So they've been like what a great experience being deployed together, because they would come watch our tapes from Afghanistan and like, why are you guys doing this? And they would learn, like, oh yeah, like here's the situation here. And they're like, wow, that's fascinating. It's like,
you're talking the American 22 pilots or the Aviators?
Yeah. The F-22 guys, the Americans. So
yeah, because they're primarily air dominance. We actually, during that deployment before the Iraq and Syria kicked off, we would go with them up to Kuwait, had a bombing range, and we would work with JTAC because they could then work on some of those opportunities to get a little bit into the air to ground game, which they just weren't as proficient with.
But they like, those guys are awesome. Like that squadron was great. They're all like, hey, what are you guys doing today? And like, oh, can I see your tapes? And so we'd trade like, well, show me how you're doing this on your tapes. So we had all of our clearances so we can go back and forth. Those they'd come in our vault and go into theirs. Like, let's watch. And we flew a lot together. Some really, really fun training sorties that we've done together with them. We should talk about it if we have time. But anyway, so all right, it's going to be the original package was which Strike Eagles were going to carry a full loadout of SDBs, so small diameter bombs. Each Strike Eagle was going to carry 20, and the original package was 8 Strike Eagles. That's 160 bombs, plus 4 F-22s, plus 4 F-16s, plus 2 B-1s, and a few other, partridge in a pear tree. So that was the original plan. So we're like, oh, well, we have to see if we have enough racks, like the actual bomb racks to go on this many jets, because then we have to have spares. And like, do we actually have that many bombs in the bomb dump? Because it's like, that's a lot of bombs. And the SDB at the time was like basically getting divested. And so because no one was dropping it, there's a bunch of reasons why we don't like it. But like, no, it has to be this. It's this many targets. So we're like, okay. So we started switching our jet configs over. So we're looking at, then him and I were working this, and we're like, where are all the munitions in the Middle East? And we have to start moving stuff on pallets with airlift. And like, how do we position like our stockpiles of munitions? Because even if we do this mission and it works, the next day we're not going to fly because we don't have any munitions.
Nothing. So the F-22s are like, hey, I need 12 of this type of missile. I'm like, great, I got 3. Where do you want them?
Yeah, they're like, what do you mean? It's not like endless supply of weapons. Like, no, that's like, well, who manages that? I'm like, we do. We're the weapons officers. Like, we have to manage this. Like, oh, well, no one taught us. Like, that's fine. No one taught us either. Like, our job is to figure this out. So we're coordinating like moving of different types of warheads and munitions and bomb racks. And at the time, like, okay, the F-22 is like, all right, you guys are coming to the fight. You're going to drop bombs on this mission. They're like, really? I'm like, yeah. And then the next step is like, well, I don't like, what do I need to do? Like, well, step one, we need to go find your bombs. And then we have to have someone build them because no one's built those bombs because they're special, like 1,000-pound warheads. They're the only aircraft in the Air Force that use them because they fit inside the bomb bay. It's a Navy weapon. And so there's not a large, readily accessible stuff for the Air Force. So I've started working to that with Tom when he's been wing weapons. And so all these like things behind the scenes that the squadron doesn't even know about, we're just like, these are going to be problems. So we're starting to move all the logistics around. And we're captains and majors, like figuring this out, right? Like we need this, we need that, like move this here. And then we start planning. And I remember we got the targets from the KAOC. Remember I was telling you before about trading skills between like, hey, and Afghanistan, like problem solving skills, like there's like really, really hard skills to learn and to master, but then you had the trade skills. Well, one of the things that the Air Force traded away was deliberate strikes. Like here's a fixed target, a building, and here's a coordinate. Just go hit it. Like turns out it's like 1,000 times more complicated than that in real life. And like those details have kind of been washed away. So just out of happenstance, I had gone to, before we deployed, I'd gone to a large exercise in Ramstein. I came back, and one of the things that I kept like coming up was like, man, we really have a blind spot with like deliberate targets. So I started writing these white papers like before we even deployed about like, hey, like here's how deliberate target planning works. And here's where you actually get the right things. And here's the real process. And like, and so then this happened. I was like, ooh, everyone read this paper I wrote like 8 months ago. It was like better lucky than good. So we're educating everyone on like, okay, where the target coordinates come from? Like, oh, it comes in this report, but that report's not the real coordinates. It's actually on this other thing that you have to have a login for that has the real coordinates. And where's the imagery? And so all kinds of issues with that getting set up.
What do you do with it? Right.
Yeah.
Because so they have a list of targets and they just go, okay, well, this flight's going to take these, this flight's going to take these. Well, they're all over the place. And you're like, no, like if we're going to group them geographically, I mean, just, and it's not, I wouldn't say someone's fault. It's just those skills that atrophy if you don't use
like
them and you don't know what you don't
planning.
know.
Do you think these are the same things that people were working through, like going into Iraq the first time? Like these are all the
of course
sequencing
Yeah.
questions
It's all
for
lessons
the invasion
relearned.
in.
Yeah, there's no new lessons. They're all just relearned. So we get that figured out. I distinctly remember the F-22 targets because like, all right, we got 4 Raptors. They're going to drop these 1,000-pound bombs in this like terrorist headquarters. And I'm like, oh, that's cool. And we like pull up the imagery. So we get the imagery, and it's like a multi-story, like huge building. and we're like, oh, that's cool. Like, give me the coordinates. So we get the coordinates and I don't even know why we did it, but it's like Google Earth, and we're taking the mensurated coordinates from the Air Operations Center, like literally like you put this in your bomb and like do not deviate. It's like just out of curiosity, like, hey, let's put them in Google Earth. So we typed the coordinates from the actual like master target list into Google Earth, and it's like 50 feet off the building. We're like,
Oh,
I know Google Earth is not to be trusted, but like that's kind of a lot. And so we start typing in other coordinates, and those coordinates, like they were like right on top of the things. And I'm like, why is it just these? So we went back to the KAOC, like, hey, can you double check that these coordinates are right? And it's like, come back a couple hours later. Oh, here's your new coordinates. It's like, dude, the F-22s would have missed their entire targets if we had not just like, let's just check Google Earth real quick. Yeah.
were the F-22 pilots not former Strike Eagle? Like,
No, not most of them.
Not in this case. Not most of them.
The origination of the F-22, because it was an air dominance platform, was mainly F-15C guys. They started opening it up later to F-16s and some F-15E, but not as many as you would think.
yeah.
In our group, it was like a 6 Raptor deployment, I think. And so like they could do a 4-ship, like that's all they could do because they had spares. But like just the people that were deployed with us, very experienced guys. They just were not air to ground guys, and things like that. Like the deliberate strike stuff has been on kind of waning out of everyone's, toolbox. So we fixed that. We get the bombs loaded. We're working all this, and then they're like, okay, change one. The Emiratis want to be in this thing. I'm like, and I remember being in mission planning in the where the intel thing was downstairs in Q. Remember the wing commander, the 1-star, he like comes in and he's got just like 2 or 3 Emiratis behind him, and he's like, hey, Pako, I know you're planning like the night one. He's like, change, like it got the change. Like, yes, sir. It's going from 8 Strike Eagles down to 4. He's like, yep. the Emiratis are going to pick up these other targets. We like, yep, okay. It's like, these are the guys that are going to do it. Here's the squadron commander. And it goes back to like coalition building. And the guy behind the 1-star, he's like, is that you, Pako? And it's like, hey, is that Smash? Is that you? So like years before, when I was at that exercise I was telling you about with the helicopter, he was the F-16 Emirati guy in the formation. So he remembered me and I remembered him.
That's why they do it, huh?
Yeah.
That's exactly.
It's like years later, we're like, hey, like, come on in.
That's cool.
And like, hey, can you get them it was like basic stuff, like the airspace. Like, yeah, right now they just need to like, what is the airspace procedures and all that? I'm like, hold on a minute. So we have all of our classified. This is how it all happened. Like, here's all the classified stuff. I'm like, okay. It was like our intel officer, like, hey, can you give me a pair of scissors? Like, sure. And I'm like,
we're cutting off the rel,
cutting off all the classifications. Like, here you go. Like, don't let it like, don't let it fall in anywhere. But,
like the crypto to be on the link together.
Yeah.
They didn't have it. And
which means you can't talk.
Yeah. It's like, there's a data
they
link.
can't see
Slightly
where the airplanes
important.
are, what targets are being hit. And so I remember I saw an email because it was kind of going back and forth between the security and the crypto people and the planning. It's like, hey, we need the crypto form. And they're like, no, they can't have it. It's not rel. It's not. And then there was just a one line from the 3-star that said, give them the crypto ! And that was enough to push it over the edge to get it to them. But that was 2014. You'd think we solved these problems.
Yeah.
We haven't. I mean, we were out at PACAF headquarters talking to the PACAF commander 2 years ago, and he was struggling with the same things. He's got nations in his CAOC that are part of the plan that he can't give the plan to. I mean, it's.
But push comes to shove, pair of scissors, phone call, like it works. So we build this package, and early on we decided, we're like, hey, like, and our there was a squadron that was coming to replace us. So it's like the very end of our deployment when this is kicking off. So like we have probably, I don't know, 10 days left of like operations before like we hand it over to them. And so we have like, these are our last few sorties where it's just us. And then they haven't even showed up yet, but they're just starting to, like, we can see them starting to trickle in. Same thing with the Raptor guys. So we're like, hey, like we got to divide and conquer. Cause we've done missions before and it's like, it's great. And we both do it, but then there's a void that's left behind somewhere. And so we decided like, okay, well, I can't remember how it worked out, but I ended up taking the first one. Oh, I know why. I was a mission commander for like, an 80 aircraft package already. And like, oh, well, clearly you'll just be the mission commander for this, night one thing. And then, there was some politics and yada, yada, yada. The B1 guy that's like co-located with the Air Operations Center. It's like, and he's going to be the mission commander. I'm like, oh, okay. Like, and it was instantly like, okay, can I just be like the strike package commander and just take all the targets?
You and was like, dude, I'm taking so many incoming shots from all these colonels and chaos that he's like, I can't take it anymore. Like, just be the strike package commander.
Yes. So I'm like, I'll do it. That's fine. Again, because we didn't tell at the time. Like, yeah, like turns out like this isn't new. Like, you just don't know.
There's a lot of work that goes into this.
Yeah. Well, not just that, but like we have some experience, like very recent experience doing stuff that looks like this. Like you don't, but we can't tell you that. So I was like, so we're kind of playing like a little. It's very weird. Like, okay, I'll be your strike package commander and kind of do all the other stuff. So I did that, and so we load the weapons, got everything sorted out, and it ended up being 4 Strike Eagles, 4 Raptors, 4 Vipers, 4 Emirati F-16s, 4 Emirati Mirages, and then all the tankers and everything else to go with that for our wave. And then I think we had.
Did you have Saudis?
No, they weren't. I don't think they were in ours. I can't remember. All these package strikes blend together. So that was the first one. So we get it all planned out, and I've got if you ever see like the podcast, the only picture I have really at my home, I have this fantastic picture that I sent you. And it's my favorite picture. It's got the Strike Eagle. It's right after the first airstrikes in Syria. It's like 23 September 2014, full afterburner. It's got the wingman and I have it on the wall. It's like my favorite picture.
It's kind of like sunset behind it.
It's sunrise.
Sunrise.
Yeah, sunrise. Cause they're going back home. My favorite picture, got a huge blow up on my wall. And the reason why it's my favorite picture is the rest of the story.
Yeah.
So we have this whole thing set up and we're like, okay, each jet is going to have 20 targets. And so we start looking at like, well, what if like I need to cover down on someone else's targets? I'm like, oh, well, the jet actually was not designed to hold that many targets like electronically. So like, oh, so then we start loading like backup media where you can like reprogram the jet. Mm-hmm. So we have duct tape and we're labeling like all the fallout options. What if 3 falls out and 1 and 2? And we have this pile of just mission planning. A lot of the buttons in the jet weren't like, it wasn't designed to do this. It's in the book, but a lot of the like thought process of how would you actually do it was just never done. Mm-hmm. And this has been in the book for like 15 years or something at this point. So then we're like, okay, we got everything covered. And so one of the things at the very end of the mission planning, we put people through kind of some dry runs to make sure all the buttons and everything would work. And we have like a little local training sim. Okay, we're good. Got the bombs loaded, people going to crew rest. And I'm going through like all of the last contingencies. And I realized like, well, one of the contingencies we haven't accounted for is like, what if like one of the 4 jets like just doesn't show up? Because like that's a lot of targets. And there's not like another jet with that many targets that we can just launch to go because it's a 1,000-mile trip.
Yep.
Like how are we going to time this? And it's like the target window was pretty condensed anyways for fuel. It was like, hey, here's your 5-minute window. Like I can't take off 1,000 miles like late and just try to figure something out. Right. And even just ground ops takes like 30 to 45 minutes. Like you're going to miss your target. And there's no time to go to a spare. Like none of that was going to work in the plan. So I'm racking my brain. I'm like, how can I solve this problem? Like, so I go back and I look at the schedule, the flying schedule, and I'm looking at like who are the lines that are flying like in Iraq. And because of the way that this airstrike was, they changed all the bombs and all of the jets. So even the jets that weren't going to do the airstrikes were flying with the same config, but in Iraq, just for a couple of days, just for maintenance, just for maintenance issues. Like we can move jets around because it takes a long time to move these bombs. So long story short, I found the formation. It was our DO, and I was like, perfect. So I go to his little rack where he's sleeping, and I go, okay, like here's what I need you to do. You're gonna show up for work because I'm gonna be sleeping because we're like 5 or 6 hours apart, like sleep wise. Said you're gonna have a set of media. You're gonna have these instructions. I'm gonna walk you through it. Because if someone in our formation falls out, like you're going to be my goalie and you're going to move formations into my formation to then go do this strike so we can hit all these targets. Because it won't work otherwise. Like we have to have a backup plan. Like the chances of this happening are like pretty small, and I'll be there anyways. So like I'll walk you through it. But here's the plan. Here's the stuff, and it's like, okay, got it. Like good. He's like, yep, got it. So you show up the next day, and the first thing I do is like, where is Stryker? Like oh, yep, he's on his way up to Iraq. You can see him going up the Gulf. Like, okay, let's go get our mission planning brief. We got the 3 stars on the line. Like, here's our plan. Here's our contingencies. Like, okay, good luck, boys. Like, go get them. Like, all right, get out there. We get the jet started. Everything's like going like just as absolute pristine as you can imagine. It's like, it's amazing. It's like hot and humid. I'm like, God, this is a terrible night for an airstrike. So we get ready. We're like, okay, everyone's green in the good. Like, okay, clear to press. And it's like, all right, we're going to take off. And we're the first people on this runway, this massive launch, because all these are coming out of the same. So we have these runways, like everyone's lined up. We have the tankers. We have command and control. It's like there's probably at this point 30 aircraft or something that are all like waiting for like the go. And I'm like, go. Like, all right, we're the first jet. So we get out on the runway, we start our takeoff, and past like 100 knots, but before our rotation speed, so there's probably like a 2-second window. Our left engine like has what's called a stall stag, and it has this massive backfire. It shoots out this flame, and the squadron commander is the guy I'm flying with because we're leading it. He aborts to take off, and we're heavyweight. Obviously, we have 30,000 pounds of gas plus a full air to ground loadout plus air to air weapons. So we're pretty heavy. We high speed aboard on the runway. We have hot brakes, and like we can't fly the jet because it just like that is it's a stall sag. It's like instant code 3. Like we have to step to a spare. Reference the plan. There is no spare plan. So I wasn't actually in the first wave of the airstrikes of the mission that I planned.
How pissed were you?
Not at all. Not at all. I was definitely frustrated of like, are you kidding me? But I had there was no anxiety because the plan was solid. I tried to what if it to death. And when you look at that picture, And everyone else like took off fine. Everything worked fine. Almost everything. I'll talk about that later if you want.
Yeah.
but the plan executed as the contingency that I planned. And so that picture that you see is the guy the night before that I had briefed that said, hey, if something happens, you're going to slide in this formation. So he slid in the formation. He became number 3. Number 3 became number 1. Like every one of those like contingencies and contingencies, everything worked flawlessly. And so coming back, that's a picture of him in the front and then the number 4 in my original formation in the back. So it's my favorite picture because it's not because I'm in it, it's because I'm not in it, because the story behind of like, thinking through the contingencies and like leading a team and setting them up for success. And so it's my favorite picture.
Man, I would have been just, I mean, you're glad that it worked, but also like, this is your chance to like take a real shot at ISIS. It sounds like.
Yeah. Well, I had another week or two of dropping
you had
bombs
some.
on him, so
he was in good company when he came back to wing weapons and mission planning because I was there.
Yeah. So because he.
Yeah. What do you say to him?
Right.
Like, are you supposed to be up in the air?
Oh yeah. I felt terrible for him. I mean, I knew what that meant. And I knew from the beginning that I was going to be in planning and on the ground, which was again, disappointing and frustrating, but that's where I needed to be. He wasn't expecting that. So
No, it's funny. I was when I told you the other squadron was starting to show up. So it's like 2 a.m. or something. And it maybe like 2 a.m. and I'm like, I'm done. I'm turning my gear. Like the strike package is like on its 1,000-mile journey. I know I'm not in it. And I'm like, well, I guess I'll just go to the gym. So I remember this distinctly. I was on the elliptical, like watching like Sports Center or something at like 2:30 a.m. on the morning of the airstrikes that I was supposed to be leading. And one of the other guys in squadrons happened to be up just from like couldn't sleep. And he's like, what are you doing here? I'm like, just getting my workout on. He's like, aren't you supposed to be? He's like, yeah, like didn't work out. I'm like, it's fine. They'll be fine. He's like, why aren't you at the ops desk? Like, I'm like, they're going to be fine. Like,
one of the cool things with those missions, I remember we landed from the night 2 strikes on the oil refineries. And I remember we still had our gear on and we were dropping our media off, and we walked into the intel shop and the intel troops were all in there and they were involved. They helped plan it. And it was on the news because it's a 2.5 hour flight back. So it was already being reported by the time we landed. And they're like, hey, you looking at this? I was like, yeah, that was us. And they're like, what? Really? I'm like, yeah. And I remember I actually went online and printed out the article just as like a posterity thing for my son.
That's cool.
And my wife. He hasn't seen it yet. It's in a folder in my mementos, but just as kind of a memento from it. Yeah.
That's really cool.
Yeah, it's kind of neat to be like breaking news. It's cool.
Yeah. and I think you were saying like there was a lot of media attention on it. Like maybe was it during the planning or did you have reporters?
So brief. I remember because I'm in the back, all the cameras and all the fanfare because of the combat debut of the Raptor.
Yeah.
It was for the Raptor, not the multinational.
It was sure that had a factor, but it was a little extra attention because it was the combat debut of the
Raptor. The cool thing was I've got one of those pictures where it's got me talking to like one of the senior Emirati. Actually, I'm talking to the 1-star, and like to the guy next to me is like the F-22 squadron commander, and then I've got like the Emirati squadron commander like behind me, and it's. I use that picture in a couple of leadership talks I've done with like some small groups. I'm like, what's amazing about this picture? Like, who do you think's in charge? Like, I'm in charge. Like, by just the nature of like the position of authority to like make this happen. I'm entrusted with this. Everyone in this room is multiple ranks above me. I'm a captain.
That is insane, isn't it?
Yeah.
To think that. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's cool. So look, as we wrap up here, I think the one thing I just wanted to ask you both is, having been out a couple years now, what do you miss most about your time in these squadrons?
That's what I miss, being in the squadron. Like it's I don't want to call it a fraternity, but it's definitely like a culture of just being around people, like-minded individuals in a way. It's not something you get on the outside of like working for a company or something like that. Missionaries versus mercenaries.
Mm-hmm.
So being people that are invested in like a real mission and a common cause, like you don't get that anywhere else. And I wouldn't try to replicate that anywhere else because you just can't.
It would be so hard.
Yeah, it would be artificial.
Yeah, and I tell people, I say it's the team. I miss the team because you're working with such talented, high-performing individuals, all with a common purpose, and it's just really amazing when you get a group together like that and everybody's operating at their best and everybody's unified behind the mission. It's that team. It's like you said, you can't really, it's hard to replicate. It's either there or it's not.
And you probably relate to that.
For sure. Miss it all the time.
Yeah.
I miss the trash talking. Just like when you're so close and it's all out of love, just like the things people will say, but it's all like, it's to get better.
Yeah.
It's not coming from ill intent. I miss that.
Yeah. I know if I was trying to explain that to someone about just the weird sense of humor. And I was giving an example to someone at my company and they're like one of them was just like in shock. The other one was laughing hysterically. I'm like, I'm not telling you that I'm telling you it's a story about this. So you can't like report me to like, HR.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, and it's funny because in the squadron in England, so a good friend of mine, I mean, great instructor, but they called him the Velvet Hammer because he would.
Who is this?
Simon.
Oh,
he would debrief you and he was accurate, but you knew it came from a place of love, right? I don't give off that aura as much.
That it's coming from a place of love?
Right. Yeah. So
I think me and you both are largely misunderstood.
Well, so before you got there, you had Simon and me were the weapons officers, right? And so we had then just found out that Pako was coming to swap out. Simon was leaving. His time was up in England, and Pako was coming in. So it was going to be me and Pako. And a lot of the team there didn't really know Pako or anything. And Simon goes, I don't think you guys understand. And this is in front of the entire squadron at a Friday tactics talk. He goes, you're going from good cop, bad cop to bad cop, worse cop. and everybody's like, what? So his reputation preceded him before he even got there. And I had to lighten up. I had to be a little bit more of the good cop.
Standards.
Yeah.
Gotta have standards.
Certainly people watching this are not going to get that you guys were tough souls.
We've mellowed out. I mean, this is a decade ago, right? And even that's like on the backside of that. So yeah, we've mellowed out a lot.
Well, we've talked. You fulfill the role you're given.
There you go.
Right? There you go. But when we're in the briefing room screaming and things are just flying out into the middle of the planning area because markers don't work and the rooms aren't set up and
it's the little things, right? If you can't do the little things,
you got to get the details right. Yeah. Details matter. Oh, thanks so much, guys. This was a blast. And Stinger, if you're listening, if you made it this far, man, thanks for connecting us. Awesome. Thanks, guys. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Ryan.
I hope you enjoyed that combat story. It's not every day we get to hear two seasoned combat aviators talk about their time in the air together and working in these units, these squadrons, fighter weapons school, all of the above. And you can kind of tell the friendship that they have. And from talking to Ryan Stinger Fishel about them, these were two of the tough guys at the squadron when you're the new guy like Ryan was. But you can see now that they're retired, a lot of that facade has worn off. So anyway, it was great to see some of the different personalities come out. Just a couple comments from previous episodes. The one with Mike, Pako Benitez, round 2. And we have Paul Griffith, 3549. Says, thanks, Mike, for sharing the call sign story. This is a great interview. And I did appreciate that Pako didn't hold back on his call sign. It's not a terrible one, but as usual, it's not flattering either. So it was good to get that one on tape. And then James Gunny Reed 3792 said, I always enjoy Pako on Ward Carroll's channel. Had no idea he was a Marine. Semper Fi. And I guess looking at Pako, I don't know if the first thing you think is, he's probably a Marine. Whereas Gunny, I think you could see it. And then last one here from Diego Ronish 62 says, what a great storyteller and well guided. Well, thanks so much, folks, for the time sticking with us this long. Definitely check out or subscribe to our newsletter. It's combatstory.com/newsletter. You can support us on patreon.com/combatstory. And then please do like, subscribe. Helps us get this out to more people. So really appreciate all the support. Wherever you're at, have a great rest of your weekend or week and stay safe.